November, I lost my dad to suicide, and then my whole world basically got flipped upside down. That 9 months was just a mess. And then the guy on the phone was just like, yeah, it's your dad, he jumped in front of a train. My passion is to make sure that other families don't have to go through what my family went through.
So today we have on the show Will Castle, who's my old university friend. He's a real estate director, been very successful in his career, but outside of work, he's an Arsenal fan. So that's something we don't agree on. And he's also a big family man. He's going to be talking around a tragic incident that happened 12 years ago when he lost his dad to suicide, but also how that led him to his current work as a community ambassador for Movember, which is a men's health charity. So, well, we actually recorded this podcast like 2 months ago, but I think it was quite synchronous in a way that I think the timing is right for us to do it today. But let's go back to the podcast. Obviously, we talked about this last time. What are the big events that happened in your life that led you to sitting down here today? So,
firstly, thanks for having me. Really excited to be back again for the real. We had the dress rehearsal. We got the live version now. So obviously we met at uni when you knew me as a very, very different person to what I am now. Very different person. So yeah, as Mikey mentioned, I lost my dad to suicide 12 years ago. So I basically, after we were together at uni for 3 years, I went straight into the working world in June. I basically took the weekend off and then started work straight away. And then a few months later in November, I lost my dad to suicide, and then my whole world basically got flipped upside down, and things changed a lot. I went on a bit of an emotional roller coaster for a few months, met my wife, settled down, got married, had kids, and then and now sort of 10 years on, I got introduced to Movember, almost coincidentally, which I'm sure we'll discuss. And now I travel up and down the country doing talks around mental health and my experiences and suicide prevention, and that really is my passion now. My passion is to make sure that other families don't have to go through what my family went through, because when you look at the statistics on suicide, it's crazy. It's like, I mean, the most stark one to me is in the UK, the biggest killer of men between the ages of 15 and 49 is suicide. It's not cancer. That is the biggest killer, and it's obviously the most preventable thing. If we just looked after ourselves a bit more and just understood each other's thoughts and feelings, and just take care of each other a little bit more, really.
I thought we could take a step back, because I know you're very open about these things. You talk about them publicly with Movember. Talk to us about, how did you find out what happened to your dad?
Yeah, so it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it, to be honest. So this is a story. It's a very personal story that I didn't actually tell anyone for a long time. And then actually the first year I did Movember, which was during the pandemic in 2020, I wrote this story down for the first. I'd never really processed it. I'd never actually sit down and told someone, right, this is what happened to me on that day. And my wife asked me during the campaign, she was like, well, what actually happened? So I told her the story, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to write this down and I'm going to publish it. And she was like, well, you can't do that. And I was like, well, I'm trying to help people. Let's see what happens. So what happened? I was out for dinner with some friends, not even close friends. I was going skiing with them, so a group of like random blokes who I'd just met. And I got a call from one of my dad's friends, who I don't speak to very regularly, every now and then. So it wasn't that weird, but it was a bit strange. And during the day, normally I speak to my dad like 2 or 3 times a day. I hadn't really spoken to him that day, which was a bit odd, but I didn't think anything of it. And then my dad's mate called me. He was like, have you heard from him? I said, well, no, I haven't spoken to him today. What's up? And he said, he's just been made bankrupt. So like, you should probably try and find him. I was like, oh, okay. Shit, can I swear?
Of course, mate. Swearing is encouraged on this show, so swear as much as you want.
Searching around for him frantically, like went to all of his usual spots, like all the bars, all the restaurants he usually hangs out in. Couldn't find him. And then I went to the car park where I know he normally parks his car, just to see if it was still there, and it was. And there was a porter at this car park, and he knew who I was. So I said, "Oh, can I have the keys? I just want to have a look through my dad's car, see if I could find any clues or anything like that." And then just found like his golf clubs, his gym bag, and I looked at my phone, it was running out of battery. So I turned on the car, charged my phone, and heard on the radio, "Oh, and there's delays on the Central line because there's been a customer incident at Bond Street Station." And I was like, okay, all right. Did my dad know where the tube was? Probably not, but let's go and check it out anyway. So walked over to the station, spoke to one of the guys, and he was like, "Oh, you got to call British Transport Police because I've got no idea what's going on," basically. So I called British Transport Police, and I was like, "Oh, I just want to know a bit more about this customer incident. I can't find my dad. Like, is it to do with him?" And they were like, "Oh, can you tell me his name and date of birth?" So I told them, and then they were like, "Right, and his address?" And I didn't know it, so I was like, "Oh, somewhere around Ascot, because I think he's just moved." And then the guy on the phone was just like, yeah, it's your dad, he jumped in front of a train." I was like, "Oh, fuck, where is he, what hospital?" And the guy was like, "So that there is no hospital, he's dead. So we're going to send a police car, just where are you?" And then everything sort of melted. Like, I don't really remember much out of that other than the police car picked me up, and then they interviewed me just to try and sort of understand why, or like try and piece everything together. And I was like, to be honest, the whole mad thing about this is like, they were like, "Have you got any idea?" And I was just like, well, he did get made bankrupt, but like, he showed no signs of weakness, no vulnerability, nothing. So it was obviously a massive shock. So this story's on my LinkedIn. It's written down in words. So yeah, please feel free to read and share, so it doesn't happen to others.
A couple of things I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned your wife asked you about this, and then it was almost the first time you articulating your own thoughts and emotions.
Yeah.
What made you decide to go public? Because this is obviously a very difficult thing to talk around, right? So how did you think, okay, I need to tell my story now?
So the reason why I came across Movember is genuinely, I just wanted to grow a kick-ass moustache. That is genuinely the reason. I didn't actually even know what they did as a charity. I vaguely knew it was a men's health charity. It was like, but there was no connection, like mental health, dad. Yeah. So it was all a bit of a weird coincidence. But as you know, I don't believe in coincidence anymore. It was lockdown. I hadn't done anything for charity for a while. I've run a couple of marathons. Actually, after Dad passed away, we were supposed to be climbing Kilimanjaro together. And obviously he wasn't around anymore, so I just thought, I'll just do it anyway. So that was like my last charity exploit, and that was like 10 years ago. So I wanted to do something nice for charity during lockdown. And then I did a bit more digging on Movember. I was like, actually, yeah, it is a mental health charity. And it's November 2020. It's literally exactly 10 years since my dad died. Let's just write a bit of a post saying, I'm doing this in honor for my dad. And then like the outpouring of like gratitude and like everyone saying how brave it was and how amazing it was that I was doing this. I was just like, all I've done is told people I lost my dad to suicide. It wasn't like some big emotional post. It was just like this is what's happened to me and this is why I'm doing it. And I was so touched, and like, I'd never done anything with such a purpose before, and it hit me pretty hard. So I set a target of £500, and then on day 2 I was on like £2,500. So I was like, wow, this is really something here. My wife, who works in social media, was like, well, this is a bandwagon that you should obviously jump on, because you could do something really amazing here. So that's how it started, and that's how I ended up telling the story. And then why did I want to share it? Well, I just thought it was going to raise more awareness and raise more money, and give me content and ideas that I could share. Because what I was doing along the road is I was sharing a lot of, so obviously I've shared with you the obituary, a couple of obituaries that were written about him, just to give a bit of an idea of the character, make it a bit more personal. And then I thought, right, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to share this story, because how many suicides are you aware of where you actually know the background of what was it like for that person on that day to discover what had happened? It's like, I think it was quite a shocking experience for a lot of people that I thought was Look, I got quite a lot of feedback. I asked a few friends whether I should do it or not, what their thoughts were, and I got a lot of mixed messages. Some were like, "Wow, that's a really personal story. You should keep it to yourself." But others were like, "That could be so powerful."
Yeah.
And I took the risk.
Just a question on that: did they change after you'd posted and people? So they were like, "Oh, you actually did the right thing. I was wrong." Yeah.
Yeah, but I think only because they were a bit worried about me and how it could affect me.
Okay.
Because we spoke about before how the media attention at the time, it was a high profile story. Like it was on the front page of the Evening Standard.
Wow.
And that really affected me badly at the time. Really. And I think my friends were just a bit concerned for my welfare.
Yeah.
But it affected me in a positive way. I got a lot out of it. I find it very cathartic talking about it. I know not everyone does, but that's how it affects me personally. And the outcome was amazing. I raised that year £16,500.
Yeah. I also think the way you're talking about it is constructive, because I also feel like there's a lot of people on social media, whatever now, that kind of talking around mental health problems more for like likes and themselves and their ego, whereas I think you're doing it in a constructive way, promoting, Movember and mental health. The thing I wanted to talk around was, so 2020, you said you started going more public with your story, and there's a long gap in the middle, right?
Yeah.
So what happened in between you getting that news, as you said, from British Transport Police, and then you coming public? What happened in the middle there?
So November 2020, I lost Dad. September 2021, I met Simone, who's my wife. That 9 months was just a mess, a blur. I don't even remember what happened in those 9 months. My life was all over the place. I was drinking a lot. I wasn't turning up to work. My mum recently shared with me a few years ago that she was like, I thought I was going to lose you. I thought that was game over. So picked myself up, met my wife in September, and then things changed. I found a purpose. We fell in love very, very quickly, or maybe I just fell in love with her very quickly. Who knows? We spoke about this before. I sort of saw her as like my guardian angel. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't met my wife at that point in my life. We don't know what would have happened, but I don't think it would have been good. And then, she took on someone with a lot of emotional baggage, and we had to work our way through that, and it was really challenging at times on our relationship because I hadn't really processed my feelings. I still don't think I've really processed them, but and then it was all just a bit silent for 10 years. We spoke about it a lot for a couple of years, but just between us, I didn't really share much. And it was just during lockdown, I thought, this is what I want to do. But in those 10 years, mental health wasn't on my agenda. I didn't really think about it. Yeah. I only started thinking about it when I started interacting with Movember. And realizing that rather than my dad took his own life, my dad was a victim of mental health issues and took his own life. But I didn't really realize that before.
Yeah. The other thing you talked about earlier was like the media attention that was happening at the time. Like, you mentioned it was on the front page of the Evening Standard. Like, how did that affect you personally?
So he took his life on the Wednesday, and on the Friday it was on the front page of the Evening Standard. I went to work on the Friday, which was obviously really stupid. And I was coming home from work that day. I saw it on the paper, and me and my dad have obvious similarities in the way that we look. And I had this really strange thought that I was going to get recognised and people were going to stop me. And so I wore a balaclava home from work that day because I was so I just don't want to be recognised. And my phone was ringing off the hook. I was getting people trying. Look, I'm sure some people were trying to connect with me in a positive way and just check that I was okay. But I just didn't want to speak to anyone. I was just throwing my phone away. So the media attention, just blew it all up. And because I was in the property industry, every meeting I was going to, every interaction I had with someone else in the industry, they knew.
Yeah.
And for a long, long, long time, I was Paul Castle's son.
Yeah.
And that was quite distressing, if I'm honest. And I really just had to take a lot of time to build up that I am Paul's son, but I'm also me. I'm also Will, and I've also got my own personality and my own challenges. And yeah, this awful thing happened to me, but let's not dwell on it. Let's move on. But that was really hard to shake.
As you said, like your dad being in the property world as well, and then you're in the property world. Why did you decide to stick it out? Because as you said, there was probably this trauma coming when you're speaking to all these different people and they're mentioning your dad. How come you decided to stay in the real estate space?
It's all I knew. I was really, because of all the financial difficulty that he had, I went from a lifestyle of absolute luxury. Like, I didn't know what it was like to fly on a commercial plane until I was 20. Like, I went from a life of ridiculous luxury and ridiculous wealth, probably all fake wealth, let's be honest. Like, he was probably borrowing up to his eyeballs, and but that's the life that I knew. And then all of a sudden that safety net was gone, and I was fending for myself, and I was, you know, being a normal person. Like, I was in the real world. I had bills to pay, I had rent to pay, I had to put a roof over my head, and property was the only thing I knew. And for me, going out of something where I was making pretty good money at the time without having a safety net of my parents, I thought, right, I don't care how much I hate it or how much distress it's given me. This is the only way I'm going to survive. Yeah. So I felt like I didn't really have a choice, to be honest.
Yeah. Going back to what you're talking about with your wife, so your wife helped you so much with this situation. You also mentioned when it first happened, a lot of friends were trying to comfort you, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess we're all going to have friends who are going through grief, right? And in those situations, sometimes we're not sure what to say.
Yeah.
So what was the difference with kind of how your wife was comforting you versus maybe how some friends were comforting you?
To caveat that a little bit, it was actually very nice to receive messages from people. But the ones who really went the extra mile, who weren't just like, oh, well, I'm really sorry for what's happened, I'm thinking of you. Yeah. Like, that isn't, obviously that's nice, you know, and it is warming to hear, but I got quite a few messages of people who would share a story or be like, oh, I remember your dad because of all the, you know, amazing lunches and things we used to go on because of you know, just whatever it was. But it was just so nice to relate it back. And, you know, genuinely, I still look through those messages today, like with a smile on my face. I love hearing stories about my dad. It's amazing. The difference with my wife was just like with any, you know, personal relationship, it was just a lot easier just to say how I was feeling and how things were affecting me, things that I wouldn't really want to share publicly with anyone else. And it was just that a little bit more intimate, and I just felt a lot more safe, basically, because I was just a bit scared at the time that anything I said to anyone could get twisted in the wrong way because of all the media attention, because of what was going on. I was very paranoid, to be honest. So I just really wanted to keep myself to myself.
So what was interesting as well in the obituary, which we were talking about earlier, I read that your dad was like a big polo player. Mm-hmm. He was a very social guy. He played polo with King Charles now.
King Charles,
the Queen gave him an award as well.
Yeah.
So he seemed like this guy that had this like really amazing social life, very extrovert. And obviously this happened, right? Mm-hmm. So why do you think, despite all of that, he had this kind of great social life, that this ended up happening to him?
It's what I talk about a lot in my talks, that it's, you know, there's the obvious cases of people who take their own lives who have been going through depression for a long time. You know, they're not happy with their lives, so obviously that does happen. But then they're the ones that take you by surprise, and a lot of them are the ones that take you by surprise. These people who have incredible lives, and you just look at them, it's like, why on earth would you end it? But there's so much, you know, keeping up a bravado of being the centre of attention, being the life and soul of the party. That must be exhausting. Yeah. Like, mentally, just having to keep up this image that everything's okay when it's not. Yeah. And like, looking back on things, there were little things now that I remember at the time that was like, that's why he said that, or that's why he was like that at that time. So, but there were things that at the time I just thought nothing of. So like, I remember during uni in our third year, like my dad paid my university fees, and like, I'd never had to chase him for money for anything, but every time it was like the end of term, I'd be like, Dad, have you paid my uni fees? Because I'm getting emails from uni, which was weird, right? But then like, I just didn't think anything of it. And obviously he was struggling to pay you know, when we were at uni, it was nothing. It was like $1,000 or something, and he was struggling to pay that at the time. But he had to keep up this image that like, everything was great and he still had loads of money. So even though he was struggling to pay my £1,000 every 3 months university fees, he was living in a 10,000 square foot house in Windsor with a swimming pool. Yeah. So the image that he felt that he had to portray to people was ultimately extremely self-destructive. And that's what I like to refer to as toxic masculinity. He was the guy who always had to have the fancy car, the private plane, the private boat, the penthouse in St. Moritz, the Rolex watch, like all of these things. And he thought that that's why people liked him and wanted to be his friend. But that wasn't the case. He was an amazing person. He was extremely sensitive at times. He was extremely lovable and caring. But he seemed to think that the reason why people wanted to be his mate was because he has some nice watches and cars, which is just really dangerous.
So you mentioned a phrase there, toxic masculinity, and we've talked about this before. And it's interesting because I think masculinity in itself can be a good thing, right? And there's certain people in society almost having a war against masculinity, but there is the toxic masculinity which you're talking around. So how can you find that like right balance with masculinity, right? But as you said, your dad was on the, toxic masculinity end, but then what's like, positive aspect of masculinity that maybe he could have had?
I think the lines are really obviously blurred now in terms of gender fluidity and how the world has adapted since my dad took his life in 2010. And we talk about all these masculine traits of being the breadwinner and looking after your family, and historically and traditionally that is masculinity, but that's not how I see masculinity anymore. Masculinity for me is here we go, this is a good story. So at my dad's funeral I didn't cry. Okay, I think like 2,000 people turned up. Like there were queues outside the door, and I stood up and I did this eulogy, and I didn't shed a tear. In fact, I was cracking jokes. And afterwards, I really took that. Like when people were like, how was the funeral? I was like, yeah, it was great. I didn't cry, and like I was really proud of that. Yeah. As in, like, yeah, I'm a man. I didn't need to cry at my dad's funeral. But how brave would it have been if I showed some vulnerability in front of those 2,000 people, and I said, actually, you know what? I am devastated. My world has been torn fucking apart, and I really miss my dad, and I'm going to show you some raw emotion. That would have been really brave, not holding back the tears. And I think that's the difference between views, then, 12, 13 years ago, and how bravery and vulnerability is viewed now.
Yeah, very interesting. Actually, the last guest we had on the show was this guy called Neil Jerd, and he's a leadership coach, but he was like an army leader for a long time. And one of the things that he was saying is obviously there's this stereotype about like army people that they're like very tough and they show no emotion. But he was actually saying like within the space of the army, people are actually more vulnerable and they're more like they're open to their emotions, which was something I wasn't expecting, because again, you have this stereotype of like macho army guys, but they're a little bit more what you were talking around, like they're obviously very masculine physically, but they're also masculine like emotionally, kind of like you were talking around.
But in private, right?
In private, yeah, probably not. Maybe not in public. We didn't go into that, but that's a good question. So, how do you think what happened changed you? Like, how has it affected, the man you are today? I know that's a tough question.
It's a big question, because who knows how it would have turned out, but my views and my values have changed enormously. As I said, I grew up in a really luxurious lifestyle with not wanting or needing anything, because I had it all. And now I like to live very much within my means. Like, I don't borrow any money or other than my mortgage, and I'm not the one who needs a big flashy car or a massive house. Like I'm just content with what I've got, and I'm grateful for it. And I just think that the person who I was at growing up through uni and I was very materialistic. I really cared what people think, and that's just completely changed now. I'm just a totally different person. Like I don't need like approval from other people for what I do and how I live my life. Very much how my dad was living, which ultimately led to his demise. And I've learned the lesson not to live that way.
Yeah. The other thing in the obituary I read was your dad used to like wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and this term workaholism, and this is actually a topic that's come up a lot on the show, and potentially something related to toxic masculinity. So what are your thoughts on like workaholism?
Work was his drug, I think. Maybe as well out of a bit of desperation in order to make that extra pound by waking up early but I also do think he had a genuine love for what he did. So, you know, a lot of the inspirational Instagram posts I read these days, oh yeah, you've got to get up at 4:30 in the morning and start working, otherwise you're going to fail. Like, it's just absolute fucking shit. But he wasn't doing it because of that. He was doing it because A, he was a really bad sleeper, and B, it was genuinely what he loved. So I think there was a little bit of difference between him, why he was waking up at 4:30 in the morning versus all these, you know, new inspiring leaders who say you have to work 55 hours a day to earn £1. But I do think there was a genuine love of work there, but that was probably masking what was going on behind the scenes a little bit.
So yeah, I wanted to talk around like your work with Movember,
Yeah.
and also kind of taking this outside the concept of your dad. Obviously, as you said, suicide is a massive problem in society in general.
Yeah.
So I guess there's kind of two sides to this. One is, you know, a person who's maybe like feeling depressed, having some of these suicidal thoughts, and then there's also friends, right? If you see your friend in like a bad situation, what are some of the things that like you advise now as a, you know, Movember ambassador?
So a big thing in my presentation is the ALEC model. It's ask, listen, encourage, and check in, which basically means just check in on your mates, essentially. Yeah. But 99.9% of the time, if you see someone going, well, what you think is a tough time, and you say, "Yo, you know, how's it going? You all right?" 99.9% they're going to be like, "Yeah, I'm fine."
Yeah.
So you need to ask again, and probably again, and probably again, until you've annoyed them so much they're like, "Fine, yes, I'm in a bit of a bad way because of X, Y, and Z." But people these days, you know, if you're living a normal life and you foresee a problem as not such a big problem, like, people just want to get on with their lives, right? But you have no idea how much an olive branch can help someone out, open that door, and, you know, especially if they haven't got a special person in their lives, someone who they're sharing with, it can be really, really helpful for that person. So I would suggest never be shy of just checking in with someone. Never think that you're going to annoy them or tread on their toes. It's always nice to know that you feel wanted and loved and thought about. And I feel that especially like lads, you know, they feel a bit like, oh, is that like a bit pussy to check in on my mate? Like, I shouldn't do that. But no, I think it is really important that in this day and age, it is not viewed as, you know, an annoyance. It's just someone you know, caring about their mate, wanting to check in. Yeah.
And it's, as you said, it's getting the meaningful answers, not, oh, how's it going? Yeah, fine. Like everyone says, it's like following up until you get that meaningful answer, and that will truly uncover how someone's feeling.
Exactly. But at the same time, you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped.
Yeah.
So I have a role at work as well, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of this, but I'm a trained mental health first aider.
Okay.
And a lot of people say to me, well, what does that mean? And I say, well, you've got trained physical health first aiders. What do they do? If someone broke their leg and you're a trained physical first aider, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
What would you do if someone broke their leg and you're a first aid?
I'd have no idea how to help them.
Well, the answer is...
call an ambulance, probably.
Yeah, exactly. You would point them in the right direction to get professional help, right? And that's all a mental health first aider does. They signpost and they point in the right direction until that person can get professional help.
Okay.
But if that person doesn't want professional help, it's a very, very difficult situation. And, you know, I've been in that situation a few times where someone is obviously not fine, but that they are saying they're fine, and it does often lead to an explosion of some kind.
Yeah. So the ALEC model you said was quite interesting.
Yeah.
So it was ask, so that's kind of what you were saying, like ask. Encourage, you said as well.
Listen.
Listen.
But the most important bit of the listen is listen without judgment.
Okay.
So if you're listening to someone and, like, you know, you're, oh, okay, that doesn't sound good, like, they're instantly going to retract back into their shell. You've got to really listen with an open mind and just be neutral. Otherwise, they'll feel embarrassed and stop. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, so listen without judgment, hugely important. And you've got the encourage as well. What are some tips for, like, encouragement?
But yeah, as I said before, it's very hard to encourage if that person doesn't want to help, but it's all about signposting them in the right direction. Like, showing them the resources that they have available to them, if they feel they need that, or just being like you know what, you can always come talk to me if you ever need a friendly face to chat to, or just essentially an open door policy to allow them to carry on opening up if they want to.
What about just being present, even like spending time with people like that, saying, hey, do you want to go out for a coffee, or do you want to like hang out together? Do you think that stuff's useful too?
100%. A lot of people, though, if they are going through a tough time, will retract. So it's those people, right? If you're often reaching out the olive branch, or hey, should we hang out? I should go for a coffee or dinner or whatever. And that person who's usually like, yeah, is like, actually, no, I don't fancy it right now. That's when you instantly think, right, something could be up, and let's keep on offering that olive branch. I think that's especially important in those situations.
And I think with what you mentioned as well, like with grief, I think it's really something you live with until your grave, right? Yeah. It's something, as you said, it's not like I process it and it's gone, right? And even actually, guy I talked about again earlier, Neil, in the last episode of the podcast, his wife died in a car accident. And he was talking around like the grief curve, and he said one of the biggest things is the acceptance, which is like, and it sounds like through this ceremony you did, you've come to deal with this acceptance that this is just going to be part of your life now, right? Yeah,
it's part of my life, and it doesn't define me, but it's definitely influenced the way that I am. Whereas previously I thought that it defined me, like I'm the guy whose dad killed himself.
Yeah.
Yes, I am, but I'm also a Movember community ambassador. I do my property work. I'm a dad of 2 amazing boys. I'm a husband to an amazing wife. Like, I've got all of these other things about me. So I learned that, that it is something that is going to live with me for the rest of my life, but it's just a small, very, very small part of me.
Well, I knew you way before that anyway, so.
Yeah, but you know what? Looking back, life's a journey, right? But looking back, I look at the person I was at university, I was like, I suppose everyone does that to some extent, right? And how much you've changed and matured. And I really, although that person has shaped who the person I am today, I look back and I didn't really like that person very much.
And you think you would still be that person if this hadn't happened to your dad? Or
I think I'd be a lot more similar version to that person than the person that I am today. So, looking at the positives of what's happened to me, I certainly wouldn't have met my wife because she would not have fallen in love with the person who I was, because I was very, very different back then. So I wouldn't have met Simone. That marriage wouldn't have happened. And I would have had very different values. Things would have been really, really different. So I like to think that in some way, shape or form, it's given me a positive direction in life.
I guess that goes back to what you were saying around like not believing in coincidences. Those things all happen for a reason, and they led to us doing this podcast now, but also you meeting your wife, right? So. Exactly. I believe now that everything's been planned out in advance, and all these things that happen, you look back in 10 years' time, you're like, right, that's why that happened, because I wouldn't have met this person, or this thing wouldn't have happened. Yeah. So. With Movember as well, what kind of work do you do with them? Because I know you, as you said, you're an ambassador, you do talks, you do workshops. Yeah.
So I do a lot of public speaking amongst large corporate companies. As you said before, mental health is a proper like buzzword at the moment, especially in the corporate sector that I work in. But I do think that's changed over the past couple of years, because 2-3 years ago it was very much like, let's tick a box. But now I think companies are really embracing it and understanding to see the benefits of it. Not working your staff ridiculously stupid hours, offering things like gym memberships and time away from your desk and working from home. It all, I think companies are starting to realize now that people are your biggest asset, especially in the industry I'm in, real estate. You're nothing without your people. So look after your people, invest in your people, which is why we have trained mental health trained mental health first aiders at work. We've got amazing private health insurance based around mental health. We've got employee assistance helpline, all that sort of things. And I think the big companies are really starting to buy into that and understand the benefits, rather than just saying, right, well, we're going to do this because we have to do it to look good. Yeah. And I guess it's also, I think everyone wins because even you're more productive, right? If you're in 100%. A better mental health space, you're going to be working better. 100%. Since it's weird, I can't think how stressed I would have been picking up my kids from school every day if we didn't have the whole hybrid working situation. So if COVID hadn't happened, and I would be left with 2 kids that I have to rush home from the office every day and pick up, I don't know how we would have coped. And the fact that my work is so flexible and I can go home, pick up my kids, put them to bed, like have that quality time with them, and if I need to log on again, that's so valuable. Like I wouldn't have had that 5 years ago. So it's really made my quality of life a lot better, for sure.
Question I wanted to ask this a lot on the show: what advice would you give to your younger self? So let's say just after what happened to your dad, as you said, you're in a bit of a state. Your mum said you may not even make it through. Like, what advice would you give that person?
Just have a more positive outlook on life. Don't dwell on the negatives. Look forward for the positives. And if you have a positive energy and a positive aura about you, positive things will happen. And just take that through life and try not to get too down about things, because good things will always happen.
Well, obviously, I know you've got your real estate background. You're quite active on LinkedIn. You've got your Movember activity as an ambassador. Yeah. What would you like people to read, right? Is there any... We're going to put the obituary and the link, your article about what happened to you. What other resources do you think people should go to?
So just on my LinkedIn and all, I share a lot about the talks that I'm doing, and obviously I share articles every now and then. So that would be a place where if you want to hear more about me and my journey. But I have to say the Movember website is absolutely amazing for resources around how you can help your friends, and how there's an interactive resource about how to have difficult conversations and signposting and stuff like that. And also, I can't forget the physical side of Movember as well, because they do support prostate cancer and testicular cancer, which is a big thing amongst young men and older men, of course. And it just gives you awareness about signs to look out for and things like that. So the Movember website really is amazing.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you one last question, actually, because this came up before the show when I've initially said it's a mental health charity, Movember, and you just said it's a men's health charity. And that physical health and mental health were all totally linked. And actually, first it was a physical health charity, and then they realised the mental health aspect. So how are these two things linked, like physical health, mental health as well?
So Movember started in 2003, I think. We're just a bunch of guys sitting around the table talking about wanting to grow a moustache and helping other men, basically, and growing away. So the whole significance of the moustache is to spark conversations, like show that you're wearing it with pride. And originally, yes, it was just to support physical health, mainly prostate cancer and testicular cancer. And it was only until they realised the mental health implications that these cancers can have on you that they started supporting mental health. And then it sort of grew from there into suicide prevention, and not just mental health from having a disease, but just mental health in general. And that didn't start until 3 or 4 years later. They've been on a journey themselves in the sense of growing the mental health side of their work. But what was quite funny is that in 2011, when I climbed Kelly, like I said, for Dad, I thought initially, let's do it for a mental health charity, let's support it in that way. But they did exist, but they weren't really that active. So I found it quite difficult to find a charity that was worth raising money for. So instead I raised it for children with cancer, which is a charity that Dad really, really liked, so I did that instead. But it's just amazing the journey since 2010 that the mental health space and mental health charities have come through as a result of it.
Awesome to hear. Well, thanks a lot for coming on.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.